Today's seminar is covering ladder strategies. The main discussion points overall, what the big areas we're going to be covering is one, utilizing dodges. The second thing would be selecting your primary and secondary roles correctly. Third one will be utilizing scouting tools. Fourth will be communicating in champion select. Fifth would be creating a climbing mentality. And sixth, we're going to just cover a little bit about duo queue as well, but just very general broad topics about duo queue. Now, the overall purpose of the seminar is to discuss these areas in a way that will increase your win rate without talking about directly in too many in-game things, right? This is for a seminar of people that aren't looking about like, oh, what champions I should play or what strategies I should use inside the game. This seminar is covering a lot of outside of game strategies. I wanted to do a unique one because this is something that was actually requested a lot by a lot of people. I do mention in some of my other seminars about like dodging and so on, and people just are generally surprised that there's actual real strategies that like people who are really good at climbing, like as an example, some of the best like ELA boosters in the world will use a lot of these strategies when they're doing their job essentially, which is like boosting accounts for money, which is a very bad thing. But a lot of people actually are in all of them. Like, Apto as an example, a lot of aspiring mid laners will often look up his gameplay, but something that they don't really know about him is that he uses a lot of these tools to have such a high win rate that he does have. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. First thing is utilizing dodges. So what I mean by utilizing dodges is that essentially in champion select, you can just close your game, which is considered dodging the champion select. You do get penalized for this. The first penalty is 3 LP and 5 minutes. Generally speaking, due to like the severity of the scaling penalties, I highly suggest only dodging once a day. And losing 3 LP is much better than losing anywhere between 12 if you have extremely good MMR, all the way up to 20, maybe even 22 if you have bad MMR for your ranking. So it's definitely worth taking the dodge. Having that you probably lose around 10 minutes of time because you have to consider your queue time, the champion select time, and then your wait time into another queue time in champion select. But you save like 10 minutes from anywhere between a 15-minute surrender to all the way up to like a 50-minute game. So I want to talk about outside of the time saving that you have of when you should actually dodge a game and when you shouldn't dodge a game. So the first thing obviously is if you have a troll in your champion select for whatever reason. Maybe you have a guy on your team that or you have two people on your champion select and they played with each other in the previous game. They're really upset at each other and they're both like picking something stupid, right? There are too many people that are like, oh, I'm just going to sit through the champion select and then hope someone dodges, right? Or they're like, well, I'm just going to report him and then he's going to get banned. While it's true, sitting through the champion select and letting it go through and you report him, that does get the report in. But if overall your goal is to climb with the highest win rate possible, sometimes you just have to let them win and dodge. So troll is definitely the first thing. Also, if he gets autofilled, which kind of goes into the next step here. But let's say you have like a support player that's mad that he doesn't get his role, so he picks like Draven support. And if no one is seeming like they're going to dodge, dodging is the best thing. Now, touching on that, the best way to dodge a game is if you dodge, like I would suggest dodging around like anywhere between 5 to 3 seconds left before the game actually starts. Going any lower could be a bit risky because if you end up being a little bit slow, or if like for whatever reason your PC is a little bit slow, you can end up being too late on the dodge and the game will start. So I dodge personally around like 3 to 2 seconds into the game. I used to dodge at the very last second, but they changed the way it works, and now it's like kind of weird and inconsistent. So I always dodge at 3 seconds, but I'm pretty good at doing it. So yeah, I usually wait till the last second in hopes that other people will dodge first. Now, moving forward, autofilled players with bad stats in the role. So in the future slides, I'm going to talk about utilizing scouting tools, and one thing that you should definitely do is look at your teammates. Hands down, there's op.gg, which is the best site to use scouting. There's actually a tool on the site now that you can just copy like the lobby text of when everyone joins the lobby, and it'll give you stats on all the players like instantly. So if your mid laner is a support main and they queue support in mid and they're Soraka one trick and they don't really play anything else, if they don't seem like they dodge or they're wanting to swap with anyone, then dodging is definitely going to be the right strategy there. Another reason to dodge is if you are severely out-compositioned and outscaled. Now, this is kind of running into some other areas. Some people here may not fully understand what being out-commed or outscaled is, which I heavily suggest doing your own research on there. I'm not going to talk about it in this seminar because it's going to go off on a very long tangent. But generally, if they have a way better team composition and also they outscale you, it's probably better to dodge because on paper your team is very likely to win. Very likely to lose, and that could be a nightmare. However, if your team outcomps but the enemy team outscales you, that may not be worth a dodge, and that gets kind of into some very technical things, which again I don't really want to talk about. But the combination of both is a 100% dodge for me. I will always dodge a game if my team is outcomped and outscaled, and I haven't dodged a game yet in that day. Now, I want to talk about a couple of areas of when not to dodge. The first thing that comes to mind with me is if I look up my top laner, and he's a top lane main, and maybe he's playing Kled for the first time in top lane. I usually won't dodge that game, mainly because if the player has a lot of experience in the top lane, there are much worse things that I'd rather dodge, especially if I, as an example, plan on playing like 15 games that day or 10 games that day. Using my dodge on a guy that knows his lane but is playing a new champion, which he has maybe practiced in normal games or maybe has another account that he plays, I won't really use my dodge in there. If he's not a top laner and he picks a new champion, that's, when I would obviously dodge. But in the circumstance that it's just like a top lane main and he's playing like Garen for the first time, I'll be like, yeah, whatever, he can play Garen. He at least knows the lane and knows a lot of the champions in the matchups. So I would just let it go. Another thing about dodging, it seems like there's a very large stigma around off meta picks. So if you have a Heimerdinger top, you should at least look up that player. If that player has like 1,000 games on Heimerdinger with a 55% win rate, that guy's a Heimerdinger god. And obviously dodging is a bad idea. So I would always take into consideration about your ally's stats and less about the champion they play. Even if it's something really weird and stupid. Maybe you have an Ezreal mid, but you look him up and his stats are amazing. Let him play Ezreal mid. Don't dodge. The guy's probably really good at it. So that's definitely something to consider as well. So let's move on to the next slide here. I see that there are some questions coming in the chat. I'm just letting you know now. I'm not going to answer them until the seminar is actually over, which will be in about 15 to 20 minutes. But you're more than welcome to keep pasting questions in, and I'll just catch them at the end of the seminar. Moving on to the next slide here. Maximizing your primary role chances. This is a really big thing. So what I typically suggest all of my students, and what I personally do, is the role that I'm primarying, I will always pick like the second highest queue priority. So if I'm a top lane main, as an example, I'll typically pick mid as my secondary, because mid is the most contested role. So even if I don't play mid much, I'd rather get the highest chance of getting my primary role and then have my secondary role the least chance of getting it. So maybe my AD carry is okay, and I'm a top lane main, but my mid's still not that. My mid's maybe slightly worse than my AD carry, but if I queue top and AD carry, I'm likely to get AD carry way more than if I was to get mid. So I'd rather, because we're talking about statistics here, right? We're talking about purely getting our win percentage at the highest rate possible. And let's say our top lane's S+, our AD carry is C, and then our mid's C-, then take the C- over, but the problem is if you play AD carry, you're going to AD carry way more than mid. So having that, your secondary role as a very highly contested role means that you're, statistically speaking, going to be much less likely to get that role. So that's a really big thing as well. I've seen a lot of my students, as an example, where they're fantastic mid lane players, and maybe they're let's say gold 5 or plat 5 or whatever, and they have mid as their primary role, and they pick support as their secondary role. And I look at their OPGG stats, and I see that all their mid laners are 55% plus win rates over hundreds of games, but then their supports are at a 45% win rate over 150 games. And it's they get support so much that their win rate tanks quite a bit. But if they were to switch to jungle, they would get jungle sometimes, and maybe they'll be completely lost in the jungle, and that's when they could, utilize a dodge as an example, if no one's willing to swap with him, and that overall makes it much more likely to get, your primary role, and also utilize swapping around with teammates. So let's say, as an example, I'm a mid main, and then I pick support as my secondary role. I'll say that maybe you are 60% likely to get mid and 40% likely to get support. Of course, those are random numbers. I wouldn't say that necessarily is true, but we'll just use that. So then I get my second role as support, and then I have a mid laner, and looking up his stats, my stats are way better than him as a mid laner, but he never plays support. And of course, he hates playing support, right? So there's no way that the mid laner is going to want to swap with me. Even if my stats are much better than him, he doesn't want to be swapped onto a role he doesn't want to play, and he doesn't feel like he's going to have an impact on the game on. However, if I was playing jungle, if I was to link my jungle stats and like the few games that I did play jungle, I did awful. I don't have many games on jungle. I'll be like, I can't play jungle. I got autofilled. Of course, I'm going to lie about not pick. You never want to admit that you picked jungle, because then they're just going to flame you. But if you're going to say, oh, I got autofilled jungle, I'm a mid main, and you link your stats, then maybe your top lane's like, okay, maybe we can do a try swap. Maybe your mid laner does play a lot of top, or maybe your mid laner plays a bit of jungle. It's better than getting filled on a role that, you don't have that much of impact on, and you're going to get a lot, like support as an example. So definitely suggest you guys to, like, if you're not playing mid primary, I'd pick mid secondary, even if you're not that great of a mid laner, because people are going to be more likely to want to swap for mid as well. So you'd be more likely to get your role. So if you're in an AD carry main, pick mid secondary. Worst case scenario, you can play like an AD carry mid. There's Lucian mid strong, Corki mid strong, and so on. So you can still make it work. And the list goes on. It doesn't matter what role you play, I would just pick mid secondary. If you're a mid primary, I suggest picking jungle secondary, because jungle is the second highest contested role, and people are going to be more likely to swap you there. All right, so going on here, I did touch on this a little bit, but when you're autofilled, you should always at least just reach out. Be like, hey guys, I'm like autofilled, can mid swap with me? And if they say no, they say no. And if you haven't used your dodge yet, you can use your first dodge. I wouldn't be like a dick about it. Just try, request it. You can even link your stats if you feel like your stats are better. But if they say no, don't flame them or anything like that. Either, if you feel like your team comp really sucks or something, then you could just, take your first dodge of the day. All right, so let's move on here to the next slide. Boom. Utilizing scouting tools. This is a really big one and kind of complex. So the first thing you should pretty much always do at the start of Champion Select is look up your entire team. Like I said, op.gg does have a tool that allows you to look up everyone at once pretty easily. You should definitely look them all up and see, like, who got the role that they actually play, and so on. Like, if you, as an example, have 3 AD carry mains, and you have like an AD carry actually playing AD carry, then a top lane AD carry, and a jungle AD carry, and like those other AD carry mains don't play top or jungle, considering dodging would be a decent idea, as an example. Also, understanding like maybe which one of your teammates is performing extremely well, whether to them being like a smurf or just like a really good player on the rise. Knowing that they're playing well is really important, because you can also know who that you're likely going to trust and make plays around, versus maybe the 25% Lee Sin, like 25% win rate Lee Sin over 300 games as your jungler. Maybe you wouldn't really trust a lot of the plays he's making, and just keep that into consideration. It really does matter. Statistics do mean things. So that's definitely a big point to think about as well. Now, another really important part is enemy scouting, for a couple of reasons. One, runes masteries. It's super nice to understand, like, let's say we're playing mid, and let's say we're playing like mid Zed as an example, and then the enemy Lux doesn't have any armor runes. That changes the way you play around her if she did have armor runes, as an example. So runes masteries, super important to understand when you're going into game, and all roles too. There's sometimes, like, if you're playing bottom lane, the enemy support may not be running armor runes or something silly like that, or maybe they're running the just complete wrong rune set. Knowing that info and you capitalizing on it is a real strategy. And then, of course, looking at the enemy team, let's say that you're a mid lane main, and it's that Soraka main we talked about before is on mid, and she's playing, Lux. You can easily abuse her. Of course, just testing it out and see, maybe she is a good mid laner, just doesn't play it much. So you can just test it out, maybe go a little bit of aggressive and see how she reacts. But definitely a real strategy I use when climbing is, scouting out enemy team, and if I'm against someone that clearly doesn't play the role, I will play more aggressive just to snowball harder. But there are times where I play aggressive and they punish me, and I'm like, okay, this guy doesn't play the role, but he's clearly a smart player, and then I just have to back off and play the lane standard. All right, so let's move on here. Also, on a small note, actually, a point I left out, which I definitely want to cover, is using scouting tools to also identify duos. Something I typically do also is, when I scout up everyone, I just like shift left click on all of the enemies really quickly, and I scroll down and look if they have like a large amount of games with someone else on the enemy team, because that obviously means they're a duo, and that's good information. Like, if the mid and jungler are a duo and I'm playing mid, it's a good idea to know that the mid jungler are a duo, so I can expect that the enemy jungler will be able to communicate and react very easily, and so on. Or, if I'm playing AD carry, knowing the enemy bottom lane is a duo is also important to know as well. So using that tool to also identify duos is useful information. So moving on to the next one here. Communicating in Champion Select. This is another really big thing. It's a really good habit as a player to do a few things while you're in Champion Select. First, just have like a copy paste ready saying, hey guys, like after everyone's picked their champions and it's like it says choose your loadout, just say, hey guys, make sure you check your runes, masters, and summoners spells. Like, you occasionally get those guys, but again, even though it's silly and kind of cheesy, if you overall want to climb with the best win rate, you have to go above and beyond, even if that means babysitting people and being like, make sure you check your runes and masters and summoner spells. Because honestly, like I would say maybe 5 in 100 games or so, I like lose a game straight up because one of my teammates get the wrong runes, masters, or summoner spells, and they tilt and they just give up on the game. And it is possible that you do go through the steps of saying that, and the person's just AFK and they don't have the runes, masters, summoner spells, and it still happens, but it's less likely. There's been times where I've had the wrong setup and someone has mentioned something and I've been saved by it at least 10 times. So still definitely useful to have. Now, the next thing, communicating level 1 plan. If you have a strong invade composition, maybe you're a support main and you're playing like Morgana or Blitzcrank, or you're playing Twisted Fate, just champions that are good at invading, communicating in Champion Select and being like, hey, let's invade at level 1. Don't be AFK. Really good. Or if you have a good stack comp against an invade comp, being like, hey guys, let's stack buy blue buff at level 1. Just be there, or be square type of thing. Just try to get everyone on the same page for level 1 plans, especially if you feel like it's important to have a level 1 plan. Based on comp is nice. I've won so many games by invading or stacking. And I always would communicate that to my teammates in Champion Select. And I also spam ping the moment the game starts. Next thing, your win conditions and other things. Communicating your win conditions, no matter really the lane, is pretty important. If you're a jungler, communicating where you plan on ganking early is really important. If you're a mid laner, where you plan to roam is really important. Or if you can't roam and the enemy is going to roam, communicating that is important. If you're a top laner, communicating to your jungler and be like, hey, you should gank, or hey, you shouldn't gank, or hey, bottom lane, plays a deep ward so I can TP. Communicating your strategy in general is really useful, especially before the game starts and when the game starts. I usually do both. If I'm in like that mega try-hard climbing mode, I'm doing everything I can to get, that increased win rate. So I will always communicate my strategy to my allies both times, like when we're in Champion Select, and I'll reiterate it when the game starts too. Something that definitely makes a difference for sure. And this is something that I kind of sit down with some of my students and talk about this stuff as well. Where, I get students that say, I've been trying so hard to climb, and of course they really want to climb, but they're not doing everything potentially they could be doing. Like, even these small things do add up. It's just about, being in that try hard, no matter what mentality, consistently doing everything you can do to win games, which these do matter. All right, so let's move into the next slide here. Creating a climbing mentality. So this I would consider a ladder strategy for sure, even though it is kind of touching into mentality a bit. I do have a seminar that's already on YouTube about climbing mentalities, but I want to reiterate here because it's still extremely important. I would consider it a ladder strategy. So the first thing is, having strong positivity while going into a game. Always be focusing on what you need to be doing to win the game, and also reinforcing your teammates. Super important because, people are humans. They're going to be frustrated and so on. So, if your top laner's falling behind and being like, just hang in there, we can still win the game, or we outscale or whatever, or something of that nature. Another really important thing is self-awareness. Being able to self-reflect and understand what's going wrong with your play is extremely important to climb and increase your win rate. So generally speaking, the best way of bringing yourself back down to earth outside of getting a coach to yell at you is just look at your own replay. Every time you die, take a note. Be like, why did I die? ? And then you just write it out on paper. Because no matter what, it will always be your fault if you die. Even if it means I trusted my Lee Sin, so I went in and I died, or something like that. You just break it down, and then you ask yourself, why did I trust him? Where did it go wrong? And so on. And just breaking it down consistently is a good way of building your self-awareness and what you could be doing to improve your play. Now, the next thing is efficiency and consistency is key. These two things are really big about climbing. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit. So efficiency, going back, a lot of these things that we've talked about so far is about increasing your solo queue efficiency. Doing a lot of things that you can do to increase your win rate outside of just playing the game, right? Another thing in terms of efficiency is just playing at the right times for yourself as a player. When you're the least distracted, when the least things are going on, where it's least likely for things to impact you outside of the game. So family, that goes in every regard, whether it's your parents, your brothers, sisters, your husband or wife, your kids, your dogs, whatever it may be. Anything that is going to be distracting you during your game is something that obviously, like, if there is the option of playing without those distractions during a certain time, you should take it. Now, consistency is another thing here. So, as an example, I remember last night, he may be watching this, I had a student where I saw him playing Kayn jungle. This student is a mid-main. He doesn't play jungle much. And he played jungle Kayn in one of his games. He did win it, but consistency here of like ultimate tryhard and consistently playing the champions you're well practiced on and, playing towards the strategies work versus switching it up is a big reason why losses happen. You may be on a win streak, you may be on a loss streak. And when you break your consistency, it messes everything up. It messes up a lot of the things you've been practicing because you're no longer practicing things that you have been practicing. He's talking in chat now, so I'm laughing. But, building consistency up is important. And people will often break consistency when they're tilted. When they feel like what they've been practicing and what they have known is right is not working for them for whatever reason, they always try to switch it up in some ways, which isn't always a good thing because you're breaking your consistency, and so on. So getting that down is super important. I see that there's a question in chat, which I'll answer. I feel like that's a good question, especially right for this point. I'm gonna break the rules a little bit and answer this. So someone asked, what if you have severe anxiety? So that's a good point. Jesus Christ. You have 2 apps available. Updates available. You know what? Creative Cloud, I don't care right now. Okay, so going on in this. I do touch on this a bit in my my mentality seminar, but I'll touch it here because it is a big point to talk about. So there's a couple of anxieties to talk about here. There's one, ladder anxiety, and there's 2, performance anxiety. I feel like these are the 2 biggest ones that impact that go into it. So and they both in combination make ladder anxiety. Either you're scared of failing your teammates and getting flamed on or disappointing yourself, or you're afraid of losing rank or something like that. And the biggest thing is those areas come from so many different things. There are some people that are afraid of losing their rank because their friends may make fun of them, or they're afraid of losing their rank because they're going to let themselves down, or they're afraid of losing their rank because they convince themselves they're better than they are. There's a lot of areas, and the biggest thing is just finding the root of the anxiety and then tackling it, because essentially there's a reason why a lot of people go to actual professionals to get help with anxiety, because there's a lot of digging to figure out where it comes from, and that's how you fix anxiety. And then you fix it by 1, identifying where it comes from, and then 2, tackling it head on. So that's a big thing there, and that's all I can really touch on it there. All right, so let's go ahead and go on to the next slide here. This is the final one. Comments on duo queue. So duo queue is really important to talk about in ladder strategies, especially because I feel like I was originally going to leave this out because it doesn't necessarily touch it on ladder strategies in some way, but I feel like it does relate in some ways as well. So I'm just going to talk about it. So if you're duo queuing, some ladder strategies that are super important, which again, we've already covered a lot of stuff about communication, but if you're duoing, the biggest thing to understand is that the enemy team will 90% of the time have a duo as well. So you guys need to be communicating more than the enemy duo. You guys need to be knowing who the enemy duo is. That way you guys know how to play around that duo. Now, another thing here is understanding combo roles. So if you're duoing, it doesn't really matter. Even if you're an AD carry player and let's say a top lane player, so that's your duo, AD carry and top lane. That seems like a weird duo combination, but really it's not that bad, because you could even, as an AD carry, place a deep ward in the brush in lane, and then let the enemy bottom lane push up, and then you just say, hey, they're pushed up now, you can teleport behind them, as an example. That's super awesome. That's really useful, and it doesn't matter. All roles can work together. It's just knowing what strategies you guys can run, in-game strategies that you guys can run to make your duo queue more effective. Even like support in jungle is good because of control wards and, getting vision for your jungler to gank bottom, or, being like a support controlling the bottom lane will allow your jungler to gank other lanes because you can take care of your own lane. There's a lot of things that you guys can do. You guys have to identify the strategies, which I don't want to go into too much here, just because it's kind of going off topic. But I really wanted to touch on this because I know there's going to be a lot of questions about it, and I'll answer the rest of the questions starting now because it is question time. Yay! So with that being said, I'm going to go through some of the questions that have already been asked, and then we're going to go forward. So someone asked here, what about an AoE comp versus a scaling comp? So I'm guessing when you say AoE comp, it's more towards team fighting, because I guess generally that's what like AoE typically means. So it kind of depends on what kind of scaling that is as well. Generally, quote unquote AoE comps scale well just because they're usually like death ball comps where they just group up and then push and have really strong team fighting compositions, while scaling champions could be extremely weak to that AoE. It just comes down to champion specific things, which it gets kind of complicated. But I'll say generally speaking, AoE comps or out comping in general is better than out scaling in general. So if your composition is going to outperform the enemy composition, even if your champions don't scale as hard as them, you guys are going to work better as a team, so you guys are just going to win. Their wombo comps typically do better than like 3 hyperscaling champions, unless you massively misplay the wombo. Next question here. Someone asked how to handle playing with a duo bot being AD carry. It kind of depends on the AD carry you're playing, and it also depends on just the matchup in general, really. I typically suggest in general as a solo queue AD carry player that you should be playing AD carries that can at least survive laning phase by themselves. So you shouldn't be playing a champion like Jinx or something in solo queue, in my opinion, for the highest win rate, just because Jinx can't really survive laning phase by herself. But champions like Caitlyn or Lucian, or generally any mobile AD carries, help a lot, because that way you can at least survive and get CS while being able to retreat pretty easily. And also champions with engage typically can kind of force a fight that you want to win, even if your support should be doing it as well. Are there any sites that analyze your team comp so you can know if you should dodge early or not? To my knowledge, no. And if there is, I don't feel like they're going to be that useful. A lot of sites that even lolcounter.com or something, that's crap. A lot of the information that gives you is this misinformation. So I don't think so. You're just gonna have to get used to breaking down team comps and understanding what's strong and what isn't strong. Do you lose if you dodge in promos? Yes, you count as a loss. Yes, that is a good point. If you dodge at 0 LP, you will just go down to -3 LP. Another big point to mention here is that dodging, while it subtracts points from you, it does not lower your matchmaking rating. So you technically don't lose MMR for dodging. Yes, this is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. All right, guys. So continue to ask any questions about anything about ladder strategies. You guys can also ask questions that are slightly off topic, as long as it's kind of in relation to League of Legends. So feel free to shoot those my way now. And once the questions stop flowing in, we'll kind of end the seminar and we'll move into the rest of the stream. Also, for those here on the stream live and on YouTube, currently with my schedule, I will be doing seminars every Wednesday at 11 a.m. PST and Fridays at 5 p.m. PST. Also, on Mondays and Tuesdays, I will also be doing seminars, but they're going to be a little bit different. It's going to be pro player analyzation. So I'm going to be analyzing some high elo players in solo queue and kind of breaking it down and helping you learn from that. You feel like your mechanics aren't up to par? Anything you can say in making them better? So a big thing about mechanics is that mechanics and game knowledge go hand in hand. You need to understand what the enemy champion is going to try to do to you. That way you can predict it and be ready to dodge it or play around it correctly. And that's a huge thing. So understanding matchups and the nature of whatever is going on is super important, because that'll help you adapt to the situation and dodge things. So people may say that like you need good mechanics. As an example, like being an AD carry and being able to flash Malphite ult requires a lot of mechanics, but knowing that Malphite's going to ult you is another big thing of knowledge, which will help you dodge those abilities. And it goes with all abilities, right? So that's super important. All right. So it seems like we're not getting too many seminar-based questions now. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording for the seminar, but we'll continue the stream.